My name's Jennifer Brill. I've been representing employers in workers' compensation matters for about 20 years now. So my focus is really the presentation. We're going to talk about workers' compensation, but we're also going to talk about drugs in the workplace. I know my old law partner and I started doing this presentation about 10, 12 years ago because we kept getting calls from employers and third-party administrators about someone who had been injured at work, had a post-accident drug test, failed it, and of course the first thing they say is, well, they don't get workers' comp because they were on drugs or they were drunk. And I'll say, well, it doesn't really work that way. So we really wanted to start really putting out the expectations to employers of here's what you need to do. If you don't want to pay them workers' comp after they get injured because of a post-accident drug test, you really need to have your ducks in a row. And then once they started legalizing marijuana, that threw everyone into a tizzy. So we kind of changed our focus a little bit. So hopefully I'm going to answer some of your questions. I'm going to go through some of this a little fast because we've only got about 20 minutes. But I do want to hit on where we are now with the law and what you need to know with respect to your employees and what you have to tolerate and what you don't have to tolerate in your workplace. All right, so just some statistics for you. 15 to 17% of employees misuse substances, whether it's drugs or alcohol. 38 to 50% of all workers' comp claims are related to the use of alcohol or drugs. That's a pretty high number. Drug-using employees are 5 times more likely to file a workers' compensation claim. And substance abusers use 3 times more health benefits and incur 300% higher medical costs for you than your average employee. And on average, employees with inappropriate substance abuse cost their employers $7,000 annually. So that can add up relatively quickly. All right, so what is an actual injury? An injury is any injury, whether caused by external accidental means or accidental in character result, received in the course of and arising out of, so those are 2 different parts, of the injured employee's employment. Just because you're at work and you fall doesn't mean that it's a compensable injury. You've got to be performing a required job duty, and that's got to be something that's consistent with your actual job. What do you do for them? And it's got to be related to or incidental to your employer's business. Again, just because you're at work and you fall doesn't mean it's compensable. There has to be something about your fall that's actually related to your employment. So drugs and alcohol in your workers' compensation program. So there's actually a statute that deals with intoxication in the workplace and how that intermingles with an injury. So under the code, an injury is not compensable if it's proximately caused by your intoxication or drug use. As I mentioned, a positive post-injury test does not automatically mean that your claim's going to be denied. So the first thing you've got to have is you've got to have notice to your employees that if they are injured on the job and they fail a post-accident drug test or they refuse a post-accident drug test, it can being the operative word, impact their right to receive workers' compensation benefits. So you've got to have written notice. Typically, we like to have it posted somewhere in your break room, wherever. However, the best thing to do is to put it in your policy, your handbook, right? And have them sign off on it. Because I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a hearing and I'll say, oh, look, we've got this drug testing policy. And they'll say, well, I've never seen that. I don't know what you're talking about. So if you have them sign off on it, that's your best bet when you go to a hearing to say, hey, they had this, they were aware of it. And it's got to say that if they fail a drug test or if they refuse to submit to one, those are the 2 things that we can use. The refusal is sometimes as good as a failure. Now, you can't just have a positive drug test. I also get people say, oh, I had them do a post-accident drug test when they came back to work, and it's 3 days later. Well, that's not going to work for me. A positive test has got to be done within 8 hours of the injury for alcohol or within 32 hours of the injury for drugs. The other thing we get is we'll just get a positive drug test from an employer. It's got to specify the levels. If it doesn't specify the levels, it's not going to do anything for me. So these are the levels that are set forth in the statute that we need. The threshold for a lot of tests, I'll give you like marijuana, I think a lot of tests for a positive, it's like 15 nanograms per milliliter. You can see from this slide that you need 50 nanograms per milliliter for it to be considered positive in the eyes of the BWC. The next thing is it's got to be a qualifying test. So it's either got to be given at the request of a police officer. How many of you have security folks on site? Okay, a couple. Most people don't have police officers or security officers on site. So that one is very rare. The other thing is it's got to be given at the request of a licensed physician, not employed by the employer. So let's say they get taken to the emergency room physician or a nurse, someone there says, something's weird here, and they do a drug test, or it's part of their treatment. So that's the second way. The third one is it's got to be administered because the employer had reasonable suspicion that the employee may be intoxicated. Again, this is one of those things where we don't necessarily see this happening. All they know is that they had a post-accident drug testing policy and the person tested positive. So what I always tell employers is, I do a lot of presentations too, where I go into the facility and give them training, and I'll say, hey, if you have an accident, you need to document everything. So you need an accident report, get as many statements as you can from co-workers. If somebody tells you, yeah, before this, they were like nodding off or they were slurring their speech, I want a statement, because that can be our reasonable suspicion. So again, observable phenomena, direct observation of drug or alcohol use. Were they in the parking lot smoking a joint before they came into work and somebody saw that? Possession or distribution, we don't have this happen very often, but I do see it come up. And then the physical symptoms of slurred speech, dilated pupils, an odor of alcohol or marijuana. A pattern of abnormal conduct. So this is one, and this is kind of how I use this. These two go together: repeat or flagrant violation of company safety rules. I talked about proximate cause before. If you have somebody who always does their job in a safe manner, and then this one day, out of the blue, they're not wearing their safety gloves, or they're not following safety procedures, those are things that I can say, hey, wait a minute, this person was intoxicated. We've got a pattern here. They usually do this, and now they're doing this. Or they usually follow safety rules. They weren't in this situation. Here we go again. It's got to be a positive drug test, and it's got to be qualifying. And if we've got both of those, the Industrial Commission, and that's where we go to workers' comp hearings, they will likely find that the intoxication or being under the influence was the proximate cause of the injury, and the injury will not be compensable under the workers' compensation system. Now, what if you can't show that there was reasonable suspicion, or it was given on the advice of a law enforcement personnel or at the hospital? The only other way we can get the claim denied is if we can get a medical report. So you're going to pay for an independent doctor to review the levels on the drug test, and also review what happened, and they'll give us a report that says the employee's intoxication was the proximate cause of the injury. So what that means is, I had one once where our test was not qualified. It was a post-accident drug test, but the levels were like 1,200 nanograms per milliliter. The threshold is 50. So I had a doctor review it and say, hey, at 1,200 nanograms per milliliter, this person was absolutely intoxicated, and their injury was approximately caused by that intoxication. And that proximate cause really kind of trips people up a lot, because you can have somebody at work who's intoxicated, but their injury was clearly not caused by their intoxication. Somebody hit them with a forklift and they were walking in a safe area. I had one where someone dropped a concrete slab, they were lifting it and moving it, dropped it on this person wasn't doing anything wrong. Nothing wrong at all, but they tested positive on a post-accident drug test. In those situations, it's going to be really hard for us to argue intoxication. And even if we can meet these requirements, the burden then shifts to the employee to show that his or her intoxication was not the proximate cause. So like I just said, somebody dropped a concrete slab on me. Someone hit me with a forklift and I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was walking in the marked walkway. So it shifts to them. So just because we have all those things doesn't necessarily mean we win. Okay, so best chances to win at the Industrial Commission. So if you come to me and say, hey, I've got a positive post-accident drug test, these are the things that I'm going to ask you for. We've got a drug policy in our handbook and it's signed. We're going to file that. So I need it. I've got to file it with them for the hearing officer to rely on it. I'm going to file the drug test with the Industrial Commission, make sure it's positive. So MISO is taken within 8 hours for alcohol, 32 hours for drugs. It's got to be qualifying, and if it's not, I need that medical report from a doctor. So you're going to have to pay, and I'll go get it for you, but you're going to have to pay for it. And then we're going to file a copy of that signed drug testing policy with the Industrial Commission. We're going to move on to medical marijuana because this is where we started in Ohio, right? We started with the legalization of medical marijuana. So we all know there's a difference between THC and CBD, right? CBD you could get in the drugstore, you could get it in a gas station. Questionable, but yes, you could. THC is the one that we care about when we talk about marijuana. That's what generates the high. So marijuana business is barely out of the starting gates, and these numbers are a little out of date because there are a lot more states now that have legalized it for recreational use. Hemp is legal coast to coast, and there's lots of opportunity to get it. Medical marijuana, why it first started coming around, there are lots of doctors who think that it actually has medical use. People use it for pain control, nausea and vomiting related to cancer chemotherapy, appetite stimulation with chronic illness. People are on medications or they just don't have an appetite. They'll use it, give them the munchies. Maybe they'll eat something. Muscle spasms caused by diseases, and epilepsy or seizure disorders. I know a long time ago when they started talking about medical marijuana, I don't know if anyone saw the documentary, but there were a number of documentaries about people moving to Colorado because they could get medical marijuana for their kids who had seizure disorders. And that was really kind of when it came to the forefront. So that's a big deal. And granted, doctors differ on whether they think that it's helpful or not. So it really depends on who you talk to. Unfortunately, there are side effects: dizziness, drowsiness, short-term memory loss, euphoria, anxiety, and psychosis, and it depends on the person. It varies from person to person. So marijuana is still a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act. The feds still don't like marijuana regardless of what your state says. So Ohio might say it's okay, the feds still say no. So the old law, and this is the original medical marijuana, there was limited legalization, and it had to be for qualifying conditions. Now, they had a whole list of qualifying conditions, but the one that was the kicker was chronic pain. We can use chronic pain for just about anything, right? So the doctor would say, hey, what's wrong? What are your symptoms? Well, I have neck pain that's here every day. It gives me headaches, blah, 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 blah. Here you go. Here's your medical marijuana card. So under the old law, you could vape it, you couldn't smoke it, and you couldn't grow it. We all know that, right? So what about the new law? This is really what matters to us. So just like alcohol, you've got to be 21 or older to purchase it, and it legalizes recreational possession and use. So if you went to a dispensary today, anyone in this room, well, probably, could get it. What does having a medical marijuana card do for you? I think you get a discount is what it does at this point. But they still limit how much you can get. But you'd be surprised how much you can get with a medical marijuana card. I was shocked when I found out. You can get a whole lot, enough for someone to be high or stoned, whatever you want to call it, all day, every day for months. But anybody can get it now. So how much can I have? You can have 2.5 grams of marijuana or 16 grams of extract, so oil or hash. And if you feel like becoming a botanist, you can grow up to 6 plants. Here it's not very easy to do, and it makes your whole house smell, so I would recommend doing it outside if you're going to do it. All right, so marijuana in the workplace, and this is where people started getting all nervous. What do I have to do? What can I prohibit my employees from doing? What if they come to me with a medical marijuana card? Do I have to let them smoke marijuana? Do I have to let them smoke it on the job? So everybody started freaking out, and really, it doesn't make that much of a difference in your policies. New law does not prohibit an employer from refusing to hire, fire, or take adverse employment action against an employee who uses, possesses, or distributes medical marijuana. Nothing requires you to accommodate, in Ohio, an employee's use of medical marijuana. So that's important. It explicitly states that Ohio employers can maintain complete control over their workplace drug policies. BWC is not going to pay for someone's medical marijuana, and that was another concern that people had. It's actually listed on things that they will not pay for. They said, well, what if somebody says they need this for their injury? No, BWC is not going to pay for that. What if they want a reasonable accommodation? So I'm going to talk about this relatively quickly because I feel like this hangs people up often. So the ADA was passed in 1990. It protects qualified individuals with disabilities from being discriminated against in connection with their employment. So you've got to, if someone comes to you and says, I have this medical condition, I need accommodations. Do you have to make every accommodation they ask for? No. If they don't like people and they want you to build them a whole new building, do you have to do that? No. But you do have to make a reasonable accommodation unless doing so would pose an undue hardship or create a risk to the health and safety of the involved employee or other employees. So a qualified individual with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of their major life activities. They've got to have a record of it. So they've got to have a doctor who says, yes, they have this impairment, or they've got to be regarded as having an impairment. So if it appears they seem to have it. But they've got to also be able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation. So just because they have a disability doesn't mean that you have to create a new job for them. They've got to be able to perform the essential functions of their job. And that's important because I'll have people come to me and say, hey, we have this employee who has these limitations and they're asking for an accommodation. Do I have to give it to them? Well, can they still do their job? Can you accommodate them and they can still do their job? If let's say it's a driver, they've got a CDL. Their restriction is they can't drive anymore. Do you have to accommodate them and create a whole new position for them? Not necessarily. Conditions that the ADA excludes from disabilities. People who pose a direct threat to the health or safety of others in the workplace. People with an infectious or contagious disease whose job's essential functions include food handling, which we don't see that too much. People who currently use illegal drugs, except for disabilities unrelated to drug use. So they might have a disability, they might be on drugs, but their disability is totally unrelated to that. So it also excludes homosexuality, bisexuality, transvestism, compulsive gambling, kleptomania, and pyromania. Adjustments that they require you to make. So reasonable accommodations, let's talk about that side. Otherwise qualified means that the disabled person, they can perform the essential job functions, except for those functions which his or her disability precludes them from doing. Reasonable accommodations eliminate or evade the obstacles that a person's disability poses to their ability to perform their essential job functions. This can be like modifying their workspace. Somebody needs to stand up every 10 minutes. Somebody needs to take a break. Someone needs different computer screen. Those can be reasonable accommodations. So how are states interpreting the right to an accommodation for medical marijuana use? Under the feds, marijuana is still illegal, but the states do vary. So many states who are just in medical marijuana provide a carve-out for employers to enforce their drug-free workplace policy, like Ohio. I mentioned that before. Nothing in the law prohibits you from hiring, firing, making employment decisions based upon someone's use of marijuana. Now, some of the states, so New York is a little different. So their state law prohibits discrimination based on cannabis use outside of work hours. So there, you can't discriminate for someone using it outside of work hours. There are some exceptions if federal law requires drug testing. So like if you have a CDL or something like that and you're required to drug test, then you can, or if they're in safety sensitive roles. And safety sensitive, I think we're going to talk about that in just a second, but it varies. So you might have people who work in your office and do paperwork. Are those people in a safety sensitive role? Probably not. Do you have a forklift driver outside? That person is probably in a safety sensitive role because what they do in their job can impact the safety of themselves and other people. People will say, can I let some people, I've got a really great employee who works in my office and I know that they use marijuana, but I do have a drug-free workplace policy. Do I have to fire them if I found out? If they fail a random drug test or a post-accident, do I have to fire them? Here's what I tell them. When we look at your drug-free workplace policy, if you do not have a problem with people using marijuana, not necessarily on the clock, I usually frown against that, but outside of work, and they're not in a safety sensitive position, you can allow it. But what I want you to do is I want you to separate out your people. So if they're in a safety sensitive position, everybody needs to be treated the same. So all safety sensitive people positions, you need to have your drug-free workplace policy. Can you separate out your administrative people? Sure, but they all need to be treated the same. Okay, so everybody in that category needs to be treated the same. So you can have some. It's really what is your threshold for marijuana use in your workplace? Are you okay with it? Are you not okay with it? Do you want to get rid of it across the board? That's totally fine. Do you want to limit it to certain people? That's fine too. So there is some lenience here on how you apply this to your employees. The bottom line is you do not have to tolerate marijuana, regardless of whether it's legal or not, which it is here. You do not have to tolerate it, and that's your decision based on your job, your business, and what you do. So it's really a business decision as to what you're willing to tolerate, and I think that's the bottom line here.